A learner may register for 9, 10, or 11 subjects, and some even obtain 9, 10, or 11 distinctions as a senior certificate pass mark. Furthermore, a learner in the natural sciences may also register for history and also obtain a distinction as a pass mark. In many cases, as I've said, learners do register for more than 7 subjects. Most of them are from well-resourced schools and are from middle and high-income families. Their parents can afford to pay for extra tuition for additional subjects. This is not necessarily the case in township and rural schools, where the majority of students do not enjoy the same socio-economic conditions. But in this scenario, the most important point to note is that we will be faced with labor-related challenges and obstacles if history becomes the 5th fundamental subject. The notional time, that is the instructional time in the FET band from grades 10 to 12, will have to be altered from 27.5 hours a week to 31.5 hours a week. To resolve such challenges simply means that there should be a negotiated settlement with various teacher unions, because they will not promote a scenario wherein their members spend more time teaching. It means that existing labor-related agreements signed with the DPE have to be altered. And as you know, this scenario is challenging because of the legal implications, and there will have to be further negotiations with the Education Relations Council. Hence, because of labor-related challenges, the feedback recorded from consultations was not in favor of a curriculum that consists of 5 fundamental subjects in the FET band, with the notional time being increased to 31.5 hours a week. That's the first scenario that we got from the feedback. The second scenario that was a result of the feedback, that is, should history and life orientation be combined? The discussions were in depth during the consultations about the possibility of transferring some of the history content to life orientation, particularly the content that is linked with the question, what is history and civic education? But since life orientation is not an examinable subject for a senior certificate at grade 12, arguments were that we could retain life orientation as a compulsory subject at FET phase, but cut down on content in grades 10, 11, and 12, and in the process reduce instructional and notional time assigned to life orientation. If this content is cut, the argument was the time allocated to teach career guidance in life orientation up until FET should really be cut down. The argument was, in other words, those students who are doing life orientation in natural sciences could be taught career guidance relative to their stream by educators who are qualified in natural sciences, not necessarily the person who's teaching life orientation, but within the natural sciences stream. Those learners registered for the economic, commerce, and business management sciences could also be taught career guidance by an educator experienced in teaching that stream. So be it with humanities. Therefore, it means that at the end of the day, the notional time gained from life orientation could then be added to history notional time at FET level. But if the opposite happens, the argument that we cut down notional time, transfer and integrate certain topics from history to life orientation, the result is that, so the argument goes, these topics, the result is that these topics and history content will not be examinable, and the quality of the history curriculum will be questionable. Furthermore, because history is a distinct academic field, transferring content from history to life orientation may mean that institutions of higher education, that is universities, might not regard history taught at FET phase as a designated subject because it is now watered down. Therefore, it means that the points that are necessary for learners to attain so that they have to access university education will be taken away from them because universities will not recognize the hybrid subject, which will result if history and life orientation are combined. In short, the hybrid subject will not be a designated academic subject. Therefore, during consultation, most provinces rejected out of hand the transfer of content from history in order to reinforce life orientation content and life orientation at the FET phase. They also dismissed the idea of 5 fundamental subjects at FET phase. Now, that leads us to another scenario. The scenario C reads as follows. It is suggested that life orientation remains a compulsory subject until grade 9, that is until the GET phase. And then after that, at the FET phase, do away with it as a fundamental subject and proclaim history as a compulsory subject that replaces life orientation as a fundamental subject from grades 10 to 12. It simply means that as present law exists, then you have 4 fundamental subjects at the FET phase. But the argument was that also, but such an approach would have to be well thought through and will call for a long-term systematic plan to phase in history at FET phase while life orientation is gradually phased out of the system. It means that all the life orientation content, skills, etc., taught at FET phase will then be transferred and integrated into what is taught at GET phase. That is, life orientation will be taught at a higher level at GET phase because you are phasing it out from the FET phase. You're not completely doing away with it. It means that content goes into the GET phase, and then you're giving more space for history because it will now be compulsory at FET phase. The reasoning is that by the time learners reach grade 10, they are empowered with high-level life orientation skills and have already chosen what they want to pursue at university. Therefore, the following three not the following 3 points. It means that as one of the participants put it during the consultations, in terms of this scenario, one of the participants said, open quote, there will be no life history, there will be no life orientation for everybody, but history for everybody at FET phase. The implication for this scenario there are about 9 implications that we got from the feedback. At FET phase, history will be compulsory and replace life orientation as one of the fundamental subjects. 2, at GET phase, life orientation must be maintained as a compulsory subject and the content must be strengthened by transferring the content which was offered at FET phase. And then 3, life orientation should be phased out completely from FET curriculum with effect from 2023 to 2025. There's a reason for that. We can't just wake up and say just because this group wants history to be proclaimed a compulsory subject from grades 10 to 12, therefore next week or next year it should be the case. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. That's why we've given a period of about 6 to 7 years from the consultations. The 6 to 7 years of phasing out life orientation in the FET band gives the Department of Basic Education ample time to address notional time for compulsory history in the FET band. The notional time of 3 hours per week for teaching history in the FET band must be maintained to avoid interfering with history as a designated subject, which will really make it possible for the learners to be accepted at universities. Again, the issue of the overloaded content and complete overhaul of CAPS will be addressed in the 6 to 7 years or so, preparing the system for compulsory history. Note, in the actual report itself, we call for the complete overhaul of CAPS. Actually, my colleague forgot to even mention the fact that the exercise that he was doing in terms of strengthening the curriculum was really painful for us. There were heated arguments. There were heated arguments because people were arguing that we are tinkering, we are catching up. We need complete overhaul now. That was there. In fact, they were not even prepared to do the exercise. I had to cajole them. It was so challenging for me. It was so challenging. They said, they call it tinkering. They call it tinkering. They don't want to do it. and CAPS, there should be a complete overhaul. Until I reasoned with them that, no, it can be done tomorrow. Yes, there are textbooks. We have to think for the textbook industry, which have textbooks which are aligned to caps and all that. We said the reason why we are saying this is 6 to 7 years time, we are still going to go out there and have a conversation with all the publishers because complete overhaul had to be done. Therefore, this scenario also suggests that the notional time in grade 10 to 12 will be altered from 27.5 hours to 29 hours per week. Remember the first scenario, it was 31.5 hours. This is 29.5 hours per week. And for us, when we analyzed the data, it said that the 6 to 7 years time, sort of a phased approach, will therefore allow the DBE to have ample time to negotiate with the relevant trade unions to address this issue. And also, if history becomes compulsory subject at FET phase, there is an obligation to increase the number of qualified history educators, most of them who are poorly trained. That's another challenge that you will have. So that is why we are calling for this phased-in approach. So given the current shortage, this can be achieved by consolidating the area of initial professional teacher education and training, IPED. Furthermore, the DBE should request Treasury to increase funding for the Funza Lushaka Bursary Scheme to accommodate the increased demand for history teachers at institutions of higher education. And also, history teacher development should be strengthened by institutionalizing, I'm sorry, I have a gap here, so I'm putting false teeth, so it's catching up with me, by institutionalizing the DPE's continued professional teacher development program. This recognizes the presence of a significant number of history educators who are not qualified to teach the subject in both the GET and FET bands. Number 9, the scenario means that the teaching of history can be used to strengthen language, reading, writing, communication, comprehension, and analytical skill, especially for the second language speakers. That is, if history is made compulsory from grades 10 to 12. Furthermore, the inputs from the consultations in the 9 provinces emphasized the following recommendations in terms of the scenario. History should be made compulsory in the FET and thus become a fundamental subject by replacing LO. This process must be phased in. They were really, when it came to that issue, they were not prepared to move an inch. And 2, teacher development and training must be consolidated and be taken seriously by the Department of Basic Education, who must offer bursaries for those who want to register for history education at universities, because now, as we speak, apparently they are excluded, they are not supported. And it's even worse for them, their counterparts in the so-called social sciences, that's the geography, do get bursaries, the Funza Lushaka. So they said this is discrimination at its tallest order. So, therefore, the most emphatic point that they made, I think this was repeated by most of the speakers, history in the FET band should not form part of the life orientation subject. We said, even before we began asking them questions, we said, we get it, we know, but they thought that we didn't get it. They kept on repeating it. But therefore, what we can say is that scenario C was preferred by the majority of the provinces during the consultation workshops. But that was not the last scenario. We have scenario D, which is the last scenario. This scenario involved doing away with life orientation completely. I think when you read the feedback from Prof. Lehwati, it was clear from both Gauteng and Limpopo that do away with life orientation completely, because the subject is not examinable, etc., etc. But there were some, and as I said, really, there were some members of the audience who said this should not be necessarily the case. And as I said, we considered each and every point as serious, because this scenario for us, therefore the implication was that, let's think about this issue and let's explain to you why we say it should be rejected completely. The argument went like this. Those who argued in support of this scenario usually pointed out that existing socio-economic factors favor those who are enrolled at well-resourced schools, that is former Model C schools and private schools, which prescribed the DBE curriculum. They argued that life orientation is studied differently by different schools. As a result, this consolidates the two worlds model defining the South African society. They argue that most former Model C schools and private schools assign their learners meaningful and life-changing community work, and also empower their learners to conduct meaningful field work research. Furthermore, they even require learners to produce evidence of such activities, including a portfolio, all of which contribute to these learners gaining good marks. In fact, they were of the view that this equips the majority of these learners with certain competencies and empowering life-changing skills. You will all know that conducting fieldwork research is a positive competency in history as a discipline, particularly at university. But there were arguments that challenged this viewpoint. They said that we have to take into cognizance that the majority of the learners are from less affluent schools. And those schools pay mere lip service to life orientation and cut corners. This is because they are not well resourced, and means that at the end of the day, they cannot guarantee the safety of their learners while they are doing field research work in community projects. It means that most of these learners are from township schools or rural areas, and then also they cannot even afford to meet their logistical demands, because if you are from an affluent school, if you are placed at a community center which is far away, mom and dad are around, they can take you to that destination, you do your work, they come back later to pick you up, and you go back home, with all the recordings in terms of the field work and everything for you to work through. This is not necessarily the case in township schools and rural schools. Therefore, these learners are prejudiced in that they are not given an opportunity to be taught about their rights and responsibilities as citizens, such as volunteerism and readiness to contribute to a positive quality of life in their respective communities. So that was the challenge in terms of rejecting this scenario. This scenario was rejected. So now, this is the most important phase of my presentation. We had the 4 scenarios. As a team, we had to sit down and deliberate matters and decide now. Because we have to make recommendations to the minister. We have 4 scenarios, and the issue was which one. And it was by the majority review. And lucky enough, we were all in the same room. Behalf of one colleague, will excuse herself, but the problem we had, because we were 7, it makes sense. But now, because we are 6, what if the split is? That's the problem we had. But we
all right, taking you out of that session that's underway in Pretoria, where they are releasing the Ministerial Task Team report, which is looking into the possibility of making history a compulsory subject at all schools across the country. We're expecting to hear from the Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, who will be releasing that briefing, or who will be addressing that briefing rather today. Let's take you now to the funeral service, which is